question that I will be asking with all y'all today is, how did your mental health journey begin, and why is it important to
Would
you
you or should
now?
I?
You can start.
Okay. So my mental health journey began when I was 15, 16. That's when I truly realized that my parents had flaws. And growing up, I was always attached to my dad, attached to my mom. I grew up to be obedient. I grew up to be demure and always listening to my parents. They told me not to do something. They didn't have to tell me twice. I just wouldn't do it. And then there came a point in my teenage years where I wanted to do things career wise. Like there was at one point I wanted to become a Disney Channel actress like Raven Simone or Hilary Duff, or I was always a writer. So I was always writing stories. I would write Harry Potter fan fictions. And so my love of writing and just the entertainment industry began to shift towards something I wanted to do career wise. And I learned that from a very early age. And so when I brought it up to my parents, that's when I could see that their thinking was flawed in a sense, because instead of saying, oh, yeah, that's a good idea, that's when they started telling me, no, that's stupid. If I were in a car with my dad and we would pass by a homeless person, he would say that's a person that tried to be an actor, but they failed. So that's going to be you one day. And he would be just really mean about it. And it really messed with my mental health because I realized these two people that I had essentially put on a pedestal weren't perfect. And I had, up to that point, I had done everything they wanted. Went to school. I didn't have boyfriends or anything. And the one thing that I wanted was to study in the entertainment field and eventually work in the entertainment industry. But then they said, no. And that's something that they didn't want me to do. And then it kind of started my rebellion phase. And so I wanted to do just everything. And then my mental health started declining. So I want to say my mental health journey started in my teens, and just navigating into adulthood, really learning to unpack and just being honest about mental health in general is, I feel like, is really important and has helped with my journey. And so that's kind of where I'm at now and where it started.
All right. So yeah, for me, my mental health journey started, I would say officially when I was probably around 22. That was when I came across my first bout of anxiety, like an anxiety attack, a panic attack. And, this came out of the blue. I never experienced anything like that in my life. And it, for like a good maybe 4 years, it was a constant struggle. Um, I stopped driving for 2 years. I stopped drinking coffee. I stopped drinking um, because it would trigger like that anxiety. So, it was something like really difficult to swallow because it was scary. When you're having a panic attack, anxiety attack, like legit, as they say, it feels like you're dying. And you can't control it. And especially if you haven't experienced it before, you feel out of control. You don't feel like yourself. So that's why it's also scary. But since then, I've always, on and off for the past few years, I've had uh been going to therapy. Therapy is always a constant thing. And even if you start and you stop, it doesn't mean you failed. you know Going through mental health, it's always like a journey discovering how you go about it, because just because it works for me, it doesn't mean it's going to work for somebody else the same way. But in terms of that self-care and mental health, I've taken steps to see what works for me, especially as I got older. But one of the toughest things about it, especially when I first had my first panic attacks, was explaining it to my family. I was scared to bring it up because it's like, a lot of them are like, it's just in your head, get over it. You're fine, nothing's wrong. Especially with my father, I felt like shame for it. Especially because guys are always like, telling you to tough up or whatever. But that's not the case with anxiety, and it's okay to accept that that's something you have to learn and go through. Um, so since then, I've been doing better. Pandemic has definitely challenged my mental health. I'm sure with a lot of people as well. Yeah, that's pretty much my start with my mental health journey.
Wow, thank you both for being so vulnerable and sharing with us your experience. I could relate when you talked about how you wanted to be, an actor, and your parents were telling you like, no, that's not going to go well. Sometimes I feel that pressure within my own family that, we have to meet a certain standard, like this career choice is gonna lead you to nowhere, whereas like you should follow this career choice because this is the one that would lead to more wealth, although it may completely deteriorate our mental health. So that's, I'm happy that you could share that with us.
Yeah, of course. I think it's really important, especially for people in our community, to know that w- what your parents want for you may not always be what's best. I mean, of course, they're trying to look out for you. At the end of the day, they love you. They're your parents and they just want to protect you from all the ugly from the world. They want to see you up for success. But also, having immigrated out to the US, where there's a lot of opportunities, I think that it's also should be known and talked about that because there's hundreds and hundreds of opportunities and career choices out here for um, kids, for Filipino people, that why should we be limited to just an engineer or just a nurse or just a person in the military? If we're exposed to so many different pathways, then we definitely shouldn't be limited and we should be able to explore that happily and have that chance to do something other than what our parents want.
I think a bulk of what you have mentioned is really important, like especially with what you have mentioned in regards to like there's endless opportunities for us, but I think just the way that our parents grew up, it's just only limited to what they see as practical.
Mhm.
So I guess this is where it kind of segues into like what values did you grow up and how has it shaped your understanding, especially with mental health and self care.
So I want to say the values I grew up with is to, above all, just be a good person, to not be, am I allowed to curse or no?
Yes.
Yes,
Okay.
go ahead. We want to hear it.
So essentially, don't be a shithead. I think that is the biggest value that I grew up with, that I still have with me, that whenever I have kids, I will instill that in them, is to just be a good person above all. You can make $1 million a year. You can drive the best cars, have the best clothes, hang out with celebrities, but that doesn't make you a good person. And I think that's the greatest value. And so it ties into what I was saying earlier about how I had put my parents on a pedestal. And then when I was a teen, I realized their flaws and I realized that they weren't perfect. And I realized that they weren't being very kind to me. Their words were very toxic. It messed with my mental health a lot. And I think it was weird and contradictory for them to tell me, be a good person, be nice to your friends, to your family, to your future bosses. But at home, they would say really mean things to me about my career choice, that I was being stupid and reckless. And I'm coming home every day from school excited about a new writing class or excited about something that I learned in my film classes, and they couldn't see that happiness. And instead of encouraging it and be like, okay, like that's really nice, tell me more about it, it was always like, yeah, that's just a hobby. Like, make sure you take your biology classes next semester, or, oh, we could pull you out of college now and put you in a vocational school so you could go right into nursing. And so instead of welcome and acceptance, it was a lot of just really it was a really toxic environment. So even though I was taught to be good at home, it was a contradiction all the time, like, you're not being good to me. So yeah.
Yeah. So as far as my family values, one thing that really stands out is just being supportive and loving to your family, like just genuinely, whether they mess up, whether they do you wrong, or they're the best to you, like that's pretty much who's been on your side. And it's also important for you to help, groom those relationships and maintain those relationships. It's not just one-sided where, say, like the parent has to have the do all the work, or the kid has to do all the work. You got to meet halfway. And if that doesn't exist, then you're going to have a broken relationship. So, that's something that I haven't always experienced in my family. However, now that I'm older, that's something that I've really taken from my papa. So that was my mom's father. That's something he really left as a mark for us kids, is that you're there for your family and you love them wholeheartedly. You don't turn your shoulder no matter how hard it is. So that's definitely something that's always played a part for me and my siblings.
Something like important that you both bring up is like, especially when I was hearing Jasmine and then Carla talk, is this idea about knowing how to kind of communicate to our parents and our family. Because I feel like for me growing up, and I still go through this like to this day, is like, how do I set those kind of boundaries with my parents, like knowing that I still live with them, and even if I tell them like I wanna I wanna be independent and like not be able to depend on much on you, because I know how much of a toll that is. It for me it takes a lot of I guess like more willingly, because I've never like I kind of second Sophia on that one. Like I've never been out of this island, out of my parents' home since the day I came here, which when I was 7. So I've never left the island. I've never really been by myself. So like this constant like just learning about mental health recently also has been really an awakening experience. So just hearing both of your experiences truly very valid, and like thank you for sharing. I know there's so much to just like talk about it. So I guess to segue is how did you both set those boundaries, especially with taking care of ourselves and your family?
So I want to piggyback real quick on something you said.
Okay.
Something you both said. So I was thinking about this the other day, right? And I feel like our generation of Filipinos, we have it harder because, if you think about it, our parents, they were taught by their parents and they were taught by their parents. And there's always the don't disrespect. You can't even be opinionated or you're disrespecting. You can't say a comment or ask a question or you're disrespecting. And that affects you growing up and dealing with your peers, your future kids. So it's up to us to really break that cycle and really learn how to communicate. You know what I'm saying? And it's like, I know how it is to leave the house and that conversation to say, hey mom, deuces, I'm leaving, but you have to have those conversations. And unfortunately and fortunately, it's on us to really make that happen. So I think what's really cool about, like, say, platforms and conversations like what we're having right now is, we can kind of like give each other like that lift, like, hey,
Yeah.
you got this,
Yeah.
like I see you with your Golden Gate Bridge background. I'm sure that's a goal. You want to see that bridge,
Yeah.
and when you're there, hit me up, but
Yeah.
but you know what I'm saying? Like it's important to make those moves no matter how scary it
Mhm.
is. And you're not going to get it from your parents. They might say no, but hey, mom and dad, I got to do this for me.
100%. I also have a follow-up question for both Sophia and Chachi, actually. Um, I want to know, because you live in Hawaii and a lot of people haven't left the islands or haven't left the house. Do you think that is what also influenced you to not leave, because you're surrounded by people who to stay in the house or stay on the island? because where we live out in Southern California, Los Angeles, it's very fast paced. Everyone's always leaving, coming in. It's a very normal thing for someone to say, hey, bye, I'm leaving, I'm going to New York next week, I'm moving to Chicago. It's a very normal, common thing. And so it's like pushing each other, like, you know what, like they can do it, I can do it too. But because in Hawaii, do you think that's because why you haven't moved out of the house yet, because you're surrounded by people who don't yet?
I think I can kind of go first. I guess for me, I'm surrounded by friends who are still living with their parents at least. And I guess maybe that's why. And also the fact that like Hawaii for me is considered a home since I immigrated here when I was little. I think it's just for me, I think it is kind of like who I surround myself with, because now that I'm surrounding myself more with like people, especially during the pandemic, I've met a lot of people from NorCal and SoCal. I really want to move now. So I guess it's really the environment, the people that I surround myself, because it's causing me to like really like be more self-aware. So just like, hey, it's time for you to go. It's time for you to leave. Like, it's okay. Like Hawaii still will still be your home, but I think
Mm-hmm.
it's for your I guess your own growth and development. For
Yeah.
my
Yeah. Hawaii will always be there. You could always move back home.
Home's gonna always be home.
Homes will always be home. Yeah.
Yes, yes. Well, for me, I actually moved to Hawaii about 7 years ago. So I wasn't born here, and with my family traveling all the time. So I actually lived in a couple of different countries and a lot of different states before I moved to Honolulu. So for me, I'm personally ready to go out there and spread my wings.
Yes.
I lived in Oregon by myself for college for a year, and then I came back home. And with my job right now, I've committed to them, so
Mhm.
I want to stay for a couple more years, but I do see myself elsewhere than Hawaii, like in terms of like building my family and just
Mhm.
rooting myself somewhere else. I mean, I love Hawaii. I love the culture and the people. I don't think you're gonna meet any kinder people than in Hawaii, but I do feel that just for my personal preference in terms of environment and location, I would prefer to live somewhere like bigger. Like in the US, you can drive and see a completely new states in a couple of hours,
Yeah.
whereas in Hawaii it's a little bit harder. And I do feel as of right now like more settled here and really comfortable that sometimes I'm like, oh, maybe I don't need to go out because it's so comfortable. The weather is nice, but
Mhm.
part of me is continuously pushing myself to go out there. So I do notice that aspect of Hawaii of like everything is more comfortable just because we have the community here. We have the nicer weather, and I think like in terms of people, I feel like I can relate to them more than I could have ever related to the communities I lived with in Oregon or in Texas. Yeah.
Gotcha. Nice. Yeah. Definitely spread your wings if you want, if you can
Fly.
fly. But yeah, home will be home. So Hawaii will always be there to welcome you back.
And like with that said, like especially because we're all like different in terms of like our location and like the generation we're from. Like how how do you think we can bring this mental health conversation into like our families?
Hmm. Okay. So I think bringing the mental health conversation into our families, I think first and foremost is just being honest with yourself first. I think admitting to yourself that, hey, I might need therapy, or if even if it's just like, hey, I noticed that I'm feeling a little off, in my head, in my heart lately. I think just admitting to that and admitting that it's okay and it's very normal and it's very valid. I think that's the first step. Second step to bringing it to your family is being honest, but also being ready for the backlash, especially within our community. I know my parents, they don't understand mental health. They think that if you're depressed, you can just be happy. Or I remember one time my mom told me that there's no way that I can be sad because I have everything. And by everything, she means roof over your head, food on the table, clothes, everything like that, which I guess in comparison to her upbringing in the Philippines, they were poor, they didn't have too much. So in comparison to that, it's like we have everything, so we're not allowed to be sad. But the thing about mental health and depression is that it doesn't pick and choose. It can choose the richest person. It's chosen Robin Williams. It's chosen big celebrities, and it can also choose anyone. It doesn't matter, how much clout you have. It will choose anybody. And so I think that's also being ready to talk about it with your family, but it doesn't necessarily mean your immediate family. It could be your chosen family, like friends, coworkers, people that you consider family, and just being honest there. And everyone is on their own pace, so you don't have to say anything right away. If you want to tell your parents a year after taking a few months of therapy, then so be it. It's your life, it's your pace. You should do what you feel is right for you and your heart.
Yeah. And sometimes too, not everybody deserves to know or hear that side of you, because they can't respect it, or they're not they're not compassionate enough to give you that support. And I think one of the basis of it is, if you bring it up like, oh, I'm going to therapy, or like, I'm depressed, I'm anxious, people are gonna likely be like, okay, go get help or you'll be fine. But I think the foundation of it should really be, you know building the relationships, so you can talk to them. And the introduction of the mental health journey is a little easier, because say for example, if I was telling, I don't know, my sister, hey, I'm depressed, but my sister isn't compassionate, or she's not never shown me that type of love and support in that way, what do I expect from her? With telling this big, like, secret. I mean, my sister's amazing, so she would support me. But you know what I'm saying? Like, I think there needs to be that foundation of support before anything. So
100%.
Yeah. Yes, I agree. Ooh, I'm thinking, like, do you both have a set of friends or go-to people that you can call anytime, like, hey, I'm experiencing this like mental health situation. Do you have a moment? I think that's so important to have like those set of close-knit friends that you could just trust with anything, because sometimes we don't necessarily, or we can't necessarily go with our families, right?
Mhm.
For that support.
Yeah, so I definitely have close friends. I mean, I have Jasmine, my
Mhm.
bestest friend here, to talk about mental health with. Or I have, I consider my younger sister as one of my best friends. And then I also have some friends that I've known for years and years. But the thing about talking to your chosen friends and your chosen family is that I know that not everyone even has one single friend. There could be that person living, whether that's in California or the middle of Kansas, who just feels so alone and they don't have anyone. But the good thing about this day and age and this era is that digital is so widespread. There are group chats, there's phone numbers, there's hotlines, there's people you can talk to virtually to help you talk it out and express your feelings. When I was a teen, I didn't really have, I mean, I had friends, but I also didn't feel that comfortable talking to them about certain mental health. So I would be in group chats with, I would hope, our teenagers and not creepy old men. But it seemed, I mean, I was able to express my feelings and people would talk back. So there is a way now that we have internet and cell phones, and there's even apps for therapy. So even if someone can't talk to a person physically, there's always going to be somewhere there. You just have to be able to be ready to ask for help and find it.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. As for me, I've like as I gotten older, I feel like I'm really happy with the group of people that I've chosen to surround myself with. A couple people fell off the group, and that's fine. But now, I can honestly say I feel completely supported and comfortable in the group that I surround myself with. And I think everyone has kind of shared in a sense their own personal struggle with mental health, and things like that. So it makes it extra special. Like nobody's here to judge anybody or scared to share their biggest like fears, their greatest ambitions, anything, and that truly feels like family. And I feel like I've curated that family that is not blood, but they're people who came into my life and they stuck around for a reason.
Mhm.
I think what both of you said combined, like it made me also wonder now, like especially with everything going digital, everything going online, it's like you think like the access to mental health is easier, but do you still see that kind of like hindrance, especially because I know some teenagers are still not in denial in terms of like wanting to accept help.
I I was thinking the other day that I feel like mental health sometimes is advertised as being like hype, a fad. It's in a lot of conversations without true understanding. And I think that can still be scary. Like even though it's out there, like the resources are out there, I think there's still something missing in terms of people really genuinely feeling safe to get that support, you know especially too because like therapy is expensive,
Mhm.
like luckily out here in Southern California I found an organization that does a sliding scale, so like when I would go to therapy I wouldn't be paying like $100 out of my pocket every session. They worked with your budget, but there's also these apps that aren't so personal sometimes.
Mhm.
I know they have what is it, Talkspace.
Yeah,
I
Talkspace.
actually looked into it recently just to see, the service and what they could provide. It was still expensive, and it just didn't feel like genuine to me. It felt more like a business.
Mm.
And when you're so sensitive, struggling with your mental health, that's something that you don't need to face. You need that support primarily, and I guess that also correlates to healthcare, but that's a whole nother conversation. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? So
Yeah, no, for sure. I can see that too, how these days, I mean, I love how people are open to saying, I feel sad, or I feel like I need help, I'm struggling with an eating disorder. But I also agree how sometimes it's become like this fad, and or where people are saying like, oh my gosh, my OCD is acting up, but instead of it being clinically diagnosed, it's just an adjective they're describing their neatness, as opposed to someone who really actually has OCD. And those people who actually have OCD feel offended, or that they're less than, or that they're not validated because suddenly someone who likes their pencils neat in a nice row is saying that they have OCD. And so there could be this skewed perception for people who don't understand mental health and the whole spectrum of it, watching TikTok videos or getting stuff online and just thinking and self-diagnosing. But I also think like, yeah, there is something a little bit missing, and I think it's just continuing pushing credible sources, and checking up on your friends, and just making therapy more available if possible, because it is expensive and not everyone has the money. Like I said,
mhm.
mental health and depression, all that doesn't pick and choose. They could pick the poorest person, but that doesn't mean that they're not worthy of therapy or getting help.
Mhm.
And it's sad that someone doesn't have the money, they're going to struggle with a mental illness that it could possibly be helped with medication. But if they don't have the money, it is really sad that they won't be able to attain that due to just not having the budget. So I think it's definitely more pushing for free programs, or a program where it's more easily accessible to everyone.
Yeah, and if you think about it too, a lot of the homeless population does suffer from mental health, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if this country, America, really cared about mental health, that's a community that they're not giving attention to. You know, something as simple as breaking down their homes, is one thing, but at the same time, they're not providing healthcare, they're not providing mental health support, they're not providing housing. There's so much that's kind of contradictory to each other, and it's like, if you can't even start with that community, how are you going to take care of the rest of us?
Mm-hmm.
You guys like bring up like so good, many good points that could be like talk about in another different like segment, like healthcare, politics.
Yeah.
But one thing that you kind of like really, what I love the most is like, um, especially here in Hawaii, where like, um, and I just watched the documentary of it when, on Sunday. Is like this kid, was they made a documentary about this homeless children, and to have her grow up and see her home be kind of dismantled every single day, and like to live in that trauma of like having her home kind of like taken away from her, but because she's a kid, she doesn't know what's happening. She's just living her life. I
Mm-hmm.
think like really, I think this world is becoming very more business oriented. So it's like not focusing on our wellness and our being. Strictly everything has been very more capitalist standing.
Definitely.
Definitely.
Oh, any last words from Sophia? Yeah.
Yeah, I just thank you so much for allowing me to be part of this conversation and for hearing both of your narratives. I'm like, yeah, because I feel like we don't get to talk about this important subject so much, out in this kind of setting. Luckily I have some friends that I can call about mental health and just how I am, but I do know of people that don't feel comfortable with opening that space. So I just thank both of you for sharing, your narratives, and I hope that, and I not just hope, but I can feel that it can help other people, open up as well and seek the help that they need.
Yeah. Well, thank you for having
Definitely.
us. Yeah, it was a good conversation, and it's an important conversation to have. And, we only hope by having more of these open discussions and putting them out there, there'll be someone watching this episode or the next one or the last ones or your whole compiled playlist of seeing people like talk about mental health and being so honest about it and thinking, you know what, like, maybe I can take control of my life, or maybe I can help that friend or that family member, or I can be more open to talking about these difficult topics, so that way people can get the help they need.
Definitely. And I think like before like we kind of close off, like before Sophia will kind of wrap everything up, I had like one last question, and this is kind of will end um before we end. And it's this question of what made you start cracking the coconut?
Oh, okay. Okay, so cracking the coconut, we first started it. So I don't know if you're aware of this news, but it was pretty big in the Filipino community. So last summer in 2020, we like to call it the Barkada fiasco of 2020. And essentially, it was when the four white guys in Washington, D.C. decided to open up a wine bar called Barkada. And it had nothing to do with Filipino culture. It was essentially as if they Googled on Urban Dictionary word for good friends, and Barkada came up, and then they just slapped it on their wine bar and their paperwork. There was nothing that had no alcohol from the Philippines,
No
no
food, no
food.
decorations,
Exactly.
nothing.
And so that's when we noticed that there was this really big divide between Filipino Americans and Filipinos back home in the motherland, or just older generational Filipinos, where there was one half saying this is cultural appropriation, and then the other half was saying, no, this is great representation, and all of you who have a problem with it are just social justice warriors trying to be like the Black community and trying to be oppressed. So you have some trendy thing to talk about on social media. And so we noticed, and we were trying to tell everybody, like, no, this is actually what happens here in the US. We can recognize it, but no one would listen to us. And it was just very eye-opening how much of a divide there really is. And so that's kind of like the seed planted. And then the more we started talking about our upbringing, we're like, you know what? I think we can talk about this on a podcast and start tackling taboo topics in hopes that we could bridge the gap of understanding.
Definitely. So with cracking the coconut, I don't know if y'all been able to see a couple of episodes, but what our goal is really for not just our generation, but the older generation and even the younger generation in the Philippines to really understand and kind of squash their idea of Filipino Americans or Filipinos in Australia, Filipinos in Canada,
Mhm.
and understand that the Filipino identity and experience is so complex and so different that the only way we're going to understand each other is if we listen and really have conversations. None of this, don't disobey, don't talk back, but really sit down and listen. Because, like I
Mhm.
said, it's going to start with us, and we have the hard job of really helping change things. But, like I said, with this platform, with our platform as well, this is the start of it. So it's really special to join you ladies, with this episode, this podcast. So
Yeah.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you both so much. And, let's keep in contact and see, maybe we can do a follow up podcast later on.
Okay. Yeah,
Down.
down. Thank you.